Hello, my name is Alex Iles, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the genetics of the city of Rome. Welcome back. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the genetic population of the city of Rome. Now, Rome itself is an amazing city. I visited there myself and participated in a reenactment event there. It was absolutely amazing. And I often jokingly say that Rome is an archaeological park where people live in it. And you have this amazing city that has had such influence over so much of the world. At one point, the Roman Empire controlled land in 3 separate continents. And it's been seen as an inspiration for so many countries' political systems in the world, with such things as like many countries having a senate or things like that, which draw inspiration, obviously, from the Roman Senate itself. In today's episode, I'm not going to be talking about Roman politics, but instead being looking at the Roman genetics. So we're going to be starting just after the Ice Age in the Mesolithic, traveling through the Neolithic farmers, the Copper Age, the early Roman Iron Age, right the way through into the Roman Republican, the Roman Imperial period, late Antiquity, which is generally seen from around about the 5th century, right the way through to the 7th or 8th century, and then finally the medieval period following on to that, looking at genetic samples from human remains throughout those periods to understand better what was happening in the city of Rome and the population that was living in the area through those time periods. So just to give you an idea of what this study I'm looking at, I've read the study by Antonio et al. And it's from 2019. It was called Ancient Rome, A Genetic Crossroads of Europe and the Mediterranean, and it covered samples of 127 human remains, and then alongside that as well was from 29 separate sites in the city of Rome itself or from central Italy and in and around Rome. So it covers around about 12,000 years of human existence in and around the area. Now, some of you straight away are probably going, oh, wow, you know, it's quite a small number, 127. But this is a paper from 2019. And for that time period, this is actually a large genetic study. Some genetic studies done in a similar period were only looking at 8 to 10 individuals. So this is a large study. And in the future, as technology advances, more studies are done. We're going to be seeing much more influence and understanding of a much more granular detail of the genetics of these different periods. Now, jumping straight in again, I'm going to give some more background. Rome as a city is founded in the 8th century BC, and it's just one of the central Italian city-states that exist. 1,000 years later, it basically continues to be one of the most influential cities of the Mediterranean. It's the capital of the Roman Empire, and alongside that as well, it is also covering 3 separate continents, and then continues to be an influential city right the way through to the medieval period, where eventually it starts to slump off in importance, with only the Vatican continuing to contain a great deal of influence on European and world politics, until obviously you come through into the 19th century, where Rome is obviously reborn as the capital city of the modern day Italian nation. So that's a really interesting bit of its potted history of its culture. To any Italians watching, I do hope that I cover this well. If you feel I don't, please go down to the comments and explain. And I'm really interested in expressing the genetics of the city of Rome and talking about that and expressing the different bits and elements of Roman history as well. So I really hope I do this well, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. So we start off in the Mesolithic, and there's only 3 human remains to work with from this period, and these people are seen as very similar when they've been analysed to the genetics of the Western hunter-gatherers. Now, the Western hunter-gatherer group, we only have a very small number. We have under 20 human remains from this period, and we know that they didn't pass on a huge amount of their genetics into later populations. They are not a major part of many other genetic groups, and were later on replaced by the Neolithic farmers. But we do know that they are a population who lived throughout much of Western Europe, and I've covered about the British subsection in another one of my videos, but I'm going to move on to a much larger group who we know a lot more about, which is the Neolithic farmers. Now, the Neolithic farmer group were very interesting because they were an admixture. Now, I've covered this in other videos, but admixture is where you have two populations, and these two populations mix together, and they have obviously relations and ancestry from two other groups, and then become a population in another area. So it was an admixture between the Anatolian farmers, mainly from the north and the western part of Anatolia, mixed in with Iranian farmers as well. So that was an admixture, and that population settled and became the Neolithic farmers who lived in central Italy at this time. And they did have some of the Caucasus hunter-gatherer genetics in there as well, which probably came from along with the Iranian farmers who had that as a part of their admixture. So those were the people who lived in the area. Now, they were from northwestern Anatolia. They'd come through Anatolia into, obviously, the area north of Greece. And then from that, they had then moved across into Italy. And as they moved into central Italy, they did actually mix a little bit with the western hunter-gatherers who lived there. But there were 95% of this Anatolian and Iranian Neolithic farmer mixture, and 5% from the local hunter-gatherer mixture. So as I said before, the local hunter-gatherer mixture, they don't make up a large percentage of later populations, probably because of a smaller population size and also being more dispersed throughout Western Europe, but they do make up 5% of the Neolithic farming population who live in and amongst central Italy. So that was their sort of background. As you go through into the late Neolithic period, you actually see an increase of the Western hunter-gatherer group, and this is actually probably because of a migration of another population into the area, who probably had a higher percentage of Western hunter-gatherer genetics within their population. So that's probably a shift through as an admixture with a greater amount of Western hunter-gatherer arrives, and then mixes with the Neolithic farmers who are living in central Italy and around Rome during that period, rather than there being an upsurgence in the Western hunter-gatherers in that area, because they've probably been mixed in and bred into the local populations in and around Italy and other parts of Europe by the point that the Neolithic farmers have really started to take over much of Western Europe. So that's how to explain that increase in Western hunter-gatherer genetics right there. Our next genetic shift is in the late Bronze Age into the Iron Age. So this is actually a transition that you see from the Bronze Age period right the way through. The Bronze Age sees a migration of people from the Pontic Steppe into Western Europe, and they're often called the Yamna, and they become corded-ware and beaker-ware culture in Western Europe over time. So in this time period in central Italy, what you actually see is an increase of 30 to 40% of the ancient DNA of these people was now from the Pontic Steppe migrations. These migrations were really helped by the fact of the development of chariots and carts, and the movement of people across meant that they now moved in and mixed with other people in the area. As they mix in with the other people in the area, we start seeing the development of the Iron Age cultures in and around central Italy, and you see the increase of trade as well. And so with this trade, you see trade with the Greeks and the Punic states. You see ivory, amber, ostrich eggs, and other things like that, as well as motifs such as the lion, the sphinx, and other things like that starting to become more common in central Italian culture. And when you see that as well, we also see that the Iron Age populations are very diverse as well. And you start seeing a mixing of the Neolithic farmer population with this new Pontic steppe population as well. But amongst the samples that they had from this period, they also saw that two people had significant genetic ancestry from Iron Age Anatolia, but also were genetically similar to Bronze Age Armenia as well. So you can see that there's that central Anatolian genetics that are now coming across as well. There's still migration going on from the east towards the west into Rome and coming across. And that could be both from the migrations from the Pontic steppe, but also other migrations, including trade and development going on as well. But again, the significant admixture going on here is obviously from the late Neolithic populations, and they are coming into the area as well. There was also one individual who's also showed significant North African ancestry, specifically from the area of Morocco. And so they were an admixture from Neolithic Morocco, and alongside that as well, the Neolithic farming population. So we can see that people were crossing across the Mediterranean to come to Rome and were mixing in with that area. One of the interesting things from this study was that the Etruscan population could not be genetically differentiated from the Latin population. And so this actually shows that there's more of a cultural difference between the Latins and the Etruscans, if there was that much of a cultural difference at this period, rather than there being a genetic difference between the two groups, which again is really interesting when we're looking at the Iron Age in central Italy and the development of what would eventually become Rome. As we move forwards into the Republican period, Rome starts really developing, and this occurs especially as its power increases from 264 BC onwards, after it has its wars with Carthage. And as it actually starts having its wars with Carthage, Rome moves from just being a city-state and obviously the central Italian area in central Italy to becoming an empire covering much of the Western Mediterranean and having interest in the Eastern Mediterranean as well. Now, as we go into the Republican period, the genetic ancestry of Rome itself shifts towards the Mediterranean. And so the population of Rome now looks a lot more similar to the population of Greece, Cyprus, and many of the Mediterranean islands. And so we can see that the influence of Rome extending outwards, becoming more tightly connected to Greece and areas like that as the Republic develops, is becoming more apparent in the genetic makeup of Rome. During the Imperial period, what we see is there's a continuation of the Mediterranean populations that existed before. So those who are very similar to Greece, obviously southern Italy, Cyprus, Malta, locations like that. But there is also a substantial, and I'm talking about 2/3 of the population within the samples that were taken, coming from the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, those populations from the Eastern Mediterranean would come from the areas that we now understand as the Levant. And when they come from the Levant, the Fertile Crescent, we see an increase in the admixtures with Iron Age Jordanian, and alongside that as well, Bronze Age Lebanese populations appearing in Imperial Rome. Now, this really shouldn't come as a surprise to us, because when we analyze the languages that were spoken in Rome during the Imperial period, Latin is obviously first in inscriptions, but then it's followed by Greek, Aramaic, and then alongside that as well, we also see Hebrew, or the language of the Jewish people, being spoken as well. Now, alongside these inscriptions and languages spoken, we also see a lot of tombstones, which actually say that the person within the tomb was of Eastern origin as well. So people were coming from the East and were actually settling in Rome because of the fact they wanted to trade, or the imperial power of Rome attracted them as well. We see temples dedicated to Greek gods, Phrygian gods, Syrian gods, Egyptian gods, and many other of the Eastern deities coming into Rome and having an influence on the Roman religious system just as much as anything else. And alongside this as well, we see the first synagogue is built in Ostia during this period too. So we're starting to see this development and these connections. Now, this is an interesting one as well, because when we're looking at it, of the samples, only 2 of the samples could have actually possibly been from Western Europe at this time. And they may have come in through slavery from obviously Gaul or Spain or Britain at that period as well. You can see that coming into Rome. But 2 of the human remains samples had that Western European heritage, whereas the rest were of the Mediterranean and the Eastern Mediterranean. And it really shows how Rome was much more focused on that area too. Now, when we're thinking about this, the explanation is to look at the differences in the population between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire was still very rural. The Romans were developing cities in those areas, but they were not as large as the Eastern cities. You're looking at the megacities of Athens, Antioch, Alexandria, and Carthage as well. Those cities were still huge locations within the Mediterranean, which had huge populations and were massive trade centres. So with Rome in the centre, and the fact that Rome was now the political capital, you would have imports coming into all of those areas, but also the fact that when Rome had conquered those countries, they had taken a great number of slaves. And as they had taken those slaves, they had brought them into Rome, and a great number of the tombstones showed that these people were involved in business, and they were the children of released slaves. So it may be the fact that these people, when they were taken as slaves, understood their home culture, they developed business connections, and when they were released, they continued to develop those business connections and became wealthy individuals in Rome, because of the fact that they were able to trade back to the Carthaginians, trade back to the Greeks, trade back to Anatolia, and also into the Levant. And they built those connections, more people came over, and there were communities of these Eastern Mediterraneans, North Africans, and also Mediterranean culture cultures like southern Italy and Greece now living in Rome because of the fact that they had those connections and wealth going on there as well. So that shows how there was this big shift as well, and how there was that development of the Roman system. We also see, obviously, with the dynasty of Septimius Severus, that there was a dynasty that had both Levantine ancestry but also North African ancestry who were in charge of Rome in this period too. So this was a really important one to actually see the development of Rome as a major city within the Mediterranean, but its connections were very much more focused towards the east than it was towards the west. The next period we're looking at is late antiquity. Now, the demographic changes in late antiquity go strongly towards Western Europe. We actually see that the population inflow from the east actually stops, and we actually start seeing a lot more people from populations that we would now recognize being similar to the population of Bavaria and the populations of sort of Western France. Now, what's likely happening here is that the major political power has now shifted over to Constantinople. And as it shifted over to Constantinople, we see during the 4th century that the grain surplus that was then sent from North Africa was no longer going to Rome, but was instead going to Constantinople. So the city of Rome, which had had a population of 1 million, now drops down to a population of about 100,000. And so when this is going on, we're now seeing this new settlement of populations who would understand as Germanic ancestry being settled in the city of Rome. Now, as late antiquity covers the period of around 400 AD right the way through to 800 AD, what you're probably also seeing is the settlement of groups such as the Vandals, the Visigoths and the Lombards as they either come through or settle in Italy, creating what would then later on be seen as the Kingdom of Italy in the area. It is also likely that what we're seeing here as well is the settlement of foederati troops, or troops from Germanic tribes north of the Alps and east of the Rhine that have been defeated in Italy in and around the city of Rome, and then their descendants obviously are living in and around Rome itself too. Rome is then transformed, and obviously because the empire is now split up and they have regional capitals, locations like Tyre, Milan, Constantinople are becoming the major centres and focuses of the Roman Empire. And they are seeing the major migrations of population movements that then grow and develop those as Rome starts to shrink and become less politically relevant after its sacking during the mid-5th century. And obviously from there, the Western Roman Empire falls, and the Eastern Empire, or the Roman Empire, continues to exist right into 1453 when you actually have the Ottoman Turks coming through. Now, as you move from late antiquity into the medieval period, there is another genetic shift within the city of Rome. And this genetic shift shows a great deal more Central and Northern European DNA being added into the city. Now, this is likely because of the fact that now Rome was a part, at various different points, of the Holy Roman Empire. But alongside this as well are the development of the Vatican as a religious heart of Western Europe. So with the Vatican now being the religious heart of Western Europe, you're going to see a lot more migration of people into the city who are focused around the church, who are focused in interacting with the church, embassies, people like that, and also trade, which are then connecting Rome to the rest of Western Europe. And therefore you see this increase in Central and Northern European DNA within the city of Rome during the medieval period. And so Rome becomes much more focused on the west, whereas in the imperial period of the Roman Empire, you're seeing Rome being focused on the east. And in late antiquity, obviously as Rome has become less politically relevant to the rest of the empire, you see the population shrink, and it's actually maybe more the Foederati and obviously later on the Vandals, the Visigoths and the Lombards who are making up a large amount of the population that basically are settling and being focused in on the city of Rome as well. So that shows some of the changes over into the medieval period from earlier periods as well. And that makes it a very interesting thing. Now, the study actually concludes that the population of Rome today is a lot more similar to Western Europe than it is to Eastern Europe, but then says that that's obviously because of the changes that occurred from late antiquity through into the medieval period, and then with obviously the creation of the Kingdom of Italy, there was a great deal of influences as well, and the transformations of Italy from the Napoleonic period onwards to make into an important Western European capital, which obviously would have new genetic material coming in from all over Western Europe and adding together to create the Italian state as we know it today. So it's an interesting one just to see those transformations over time. Now, obviously, for me, I love Rome. I love the development of the Roman Empire and all of the different aspects. And what I absolutely loved about this episode was being able to look at how in the Imperial period, Rome actually was one of those major mega cities of the Mediterranean. And also it really helped me to focus my mind in, because so often I can be focused on the Western Empire, on Britain and things like that. But you have to remember the Western Empire was much more sparsely populated than the Eastern Empire, that had those ancient Mediterranean mega cities that obviously had so much influence on the way that the Roman Empire worked. Places like Alexandria, which in so many ways were the intellectual center of the East. Places like Antioch, a major trading location. Obviously, Rome itself, Carthage, being the grain basket of North Africa and a central location from where North Africa was obviously being exporting its grain into the rest of the Mediterranean from. And then later on, obviously, you have the development of Constantinople, which would then shift everything further to the east and therefore make Rome less relevant within the political system of the empire. So that really just was something that I really enjoyed looking at, and actually helping to reframe my thinking in many ways about what I felt about Rome and how I would imagine Rome during the imperial period, from around about the time of Augustus to about the year 300, and then obviously into the 4th century, the developments and the changes that Rome would have seen, obviously with the dynasty of Constantine, which ties in very nicely with my Roman political series, if you're interested in that, which obviously covers the changes from the Republican period right the way through to the end of the dynasty of Constantine. So I really hope you would go away and have a look at that too. Overall, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, that it's opened up some ideas of what the city of Rome would be like and what Rome was like throughout that whole period with the genetics and the study itself. In the description, I'll put the study so you can have a look at it too and have a read of it and have a more of a think. But I really hope I've opened up the world of Roman genetics to you and that you'll go away with a new understanding of the Roman Empire. Finally, I would like to ask if you could like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and if you'd like to support me further, I do also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi account down in the description that basically means I can dedicate time to producing these so that you can enjoy them and discover more about the history. Overall, I hope you join me for another episode in the near future, and thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe and well. Goodbye.